Hi, everyone. Justin Henderson here, Senior Vice President of Sales over at RecruitMilitary in Bradley Morris. Hey, thank you all so much for joining the fourth episode of Vetonomics. I'm really excited about this opportunity, or this episode specifically, because we're going to have our first guest. And I will talk about our guest in a few minutes. He is virtually backstage, and will be joining us in a few minutes. But what I wanted to do was first show you about our what we do every month, which is break down the jobs report number, which was a really good number. If we could get that up on screen, here we go with the Vetonomics. And as you can see, November numbers. We're going to dissect the numbers first. I added something new today this month because I thought it would kind of put things in perspective. When we talk about percentages, it's really hard to quantify that into real numbers. So what I did at this November's month with this one was actually break down the numbers. So our unemployment rates really didn't change on the veteran side. We moved from 3.8, 3.9, which is kind of where we've been floating. But to give you an idea of what those numbers mean, veterans are 10% of the U.S. workforce. We're 10% of the U.S. population, 7% of the U.S. workforce. And when we say 3.9% unemployment rate, what we're saying is across the country, there's about 325,000 veterans looking for employment at any given time. And you can go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, BLS, and actually break those down by states if that interests you. I know we did that last month, and if you go to RecruitMilitary's YouTube page, you will find that video, that Vetonomics episode 3 video that talks about that. But so right now is what we're saying is there's about 325,000 veterans looking for employment with 4.6% unemployment. You're looking at about 7.4 million unemployed citizens in the country. And remember, that's comparing to just over a year ago when we were at 6.5% unemployment rate, and then we moved to 13%, 6.5 for veterans and 13% nationally. So definitely doing a big recovery. Also, what I wanted to do today was really break down the jobs report by the numbers. Something people don't think about is the way our unemployment rate works. It's those that are employable looking for employment. Other countries will look at total populace, and that's their labor participation rate. So some developed countries in Northern Europe, they'll have labor participation rate 70, 75%. To give you an idea of us, we were at 63.3% in February 2020. The rate has been staying steady this year, really at 61.6%. So what that's showing us is that we're still down 1.7 million people to enter the labor force. And what we're going to see is kind of where those people are. So right now, telework, which is something I'm involved in, it spiked up to 13. It was actually 14.3% at one point. It was 13.2% in September, down to 11.6% in October. I will tell you, I think that's going to go back up as the RecruitMilitary job board, as well as Indeed, has noticed a very large spike in remote work anywhere type roles. So I think that telework, remote work number is going to creep back up, and it's going to be part of our new workforce. We're still 1 million citizens are still in the labor market at all. They're not interviewing. They're not trying to get back in the labor market. We're not quite sure what that could be. Could be single parents dealing with kids, or people dealing with older parents that they've got to take care of, whatever it may be. But there is still some pressure to be released when those people are able to get back into the market. And then what was really fascinating for me today when I reviewed this, again from the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics website, is that still 1.2 million people are marked as laid off from their jobs that are waiting just to go back in. And we've talked about this several times, but really what we went from is the largest service-based economy to the largest product-based economy, which we went from entertainment, restaurants, movie theaters, resorts, hotels, all that, to buying stuff, washers, dishwashers, fridges, virtual reality, whatever. So it was neat to see that we hit 531,000 new jobs. And if you look at it, 164,000 leisure hospitality, 119 food service drinking facilities, and then another 35,000 in retail. So over half of the jobs that were created were in that service sector. So it looks like the American economy as we knew it is trying to come back. But also, like anything else, regulation, anything else, once you kind of go one way, you never get rid of it. So I think we are going to become more centralized in our products that we purchase, U.S. manufacturing more than international, just due to COVID and this coming back. But you also see constructions coming back, transportation, warehouse, and manufacturing. The manufacturing, transportation, warehouse, really important. Our guest today, Chris Robinson, is out of manufacturing, and that's going to be really interesting to talk to him about that. One other thing of that product-based versus service-based economy, our trade deficit hit a record high. With 80.9 billion in exports is our gap. And again, that's coming from industrial supplies and materials. We are importing more to produce it here and sell it here than we ever have. So of course that import-export is going to trade. And with no further ado, I'm going to introduce Chris Robinson. Chris is the general manager at Mitsubishi Power in Orlando. He's also a former Navy nuclear submarine officer, earned his master's degree in chemistry material science from UCLA and his MBA from Georgetown. Chris and I have known each other for 10 years now, I think, Chris?
Yeah, going on 11 years now. Yep.
Yeah, right. So when Chris and I met, he was a manager over at FlowServe, a really interesting role. He had built where he was part of an internal consulting group within that team. And he would hire military officers to come in and do what they do best, problem solve. Chris and I have known each other so long, we actually shared a soda when Bin Laden was killed because we were at a Bradley Morris hiring event. So, Chris, the reason I asked you to come on here was really you have that unique experience that you are a veteran who transitioned out of the military into manufacturing. You dissected that code of how to leverage your leadership and technical skill set out of the military into corporate America. And then you had to do the reverse. You had to figure out, hey, how do I find more people and identify the right talent to come in behind me? And I know it's your newest role, you're kind of doing the same thing. Hey, you're in a new place, solving problems. We know we're in a talent scarcity market right now, and finding the right human capital is really important to any operational leader.
Right.
So I thought if you didn't mind, I'd ask you a few questions and we'll see what you have to say. Are you good with that?
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
Outstanding. So I think my first question would be, as coming out of the military and transitioning into your civilian career, can you walk us through that? And really, because I want to know, as we have military officers and we have enlisted professionals that are transitioning out, anything you felt like you did right and anything you might feel like you could improve on for our guests that are listening.
Yeah, absolutely. So coming out of the Navy, Justin, I had finished my sea tour on USS Pennsylvania, the Keystone of Defense, and then did my shore tour inside the Beltway. And I had just completed my MBA at Georgetown, and my wife and I were considering a transition to the civilian workforce. And ultimately, we were growing family and looking for that transition. And so that's when I transitioned over to FlowServe, as you indicated, where I was at for about 11 years. And that was my first major exposure to the civilian job search, the civilian work climate, and then ultimately manufacturing, which I've always been interested in and I've got growing passion about. So I did. I was at FlowServe for about 11 years in various roles, and you highlighted the general manager role at the Charlotte location, and I was also in the corporate office supporting operational excellence there. Did a role over at Rurpump, another equipment supplier, for a couple of years as the VP of Ops before, as you highlighted, I came over to Mitsubishi as their general manager about a year ago. So that's kind of the overview of the timeline. You asked a little bit about some of the lessons learned.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I will say, if your only exposure is to military life and you're coming to the civilian world, of course it's different, but really it's quite shocking how the differences are. And so just starting with the very job search, right? My first recommendation would be, if I had to do things differently, to be a lot more rigorous in terms of defining and planning the job search, right? Don't just fall into it you need to sit down with pen and paper and write down, what are the considerations? How long are you going to look for? If you had asked me when I made the transition, how long are you going to be searching? And my response would have been, I don't know, as long as it takes, right? But
Right.
in reality, you've got the trade-off of finding that perfect role, but also, feeding your family. You got to be thinking about those things. And then ultimately, shameless plug here, don't do it alone, right? Ultimately,
Yeah.
you have organizations like RecruitMilitary who are experts in that process and can help you along.
Something I heard from a military officer transitioning this week was he said, he referenced the hours that he spent into preparing for his boards.
Yes.
In the military compared to the minutes he spent preparing for an interview.
Yes.
And when he said he failed the interview, and he said, it's just my fault. I took the board so serious promotion, yet here is a career transition that I spent minutes covering down. And so that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing. And then if you look back, at younger Chris, this is going to go into the third question too,
right.
But when you first transition, one thing I want to know is from a Navy perspective, I've heard this forever, that a ship or a submarine, it's a group of equipment in tandem for a common goal. And that when sailors go into a manufacturing environment, that looks eerily similar.
Mm.
Was that first of all, was that something that you saw when you went to with FlowServe and did an interview? Did you see the piece of equipment and it all kind of connect that, hey, this is like maintenance in a sub or a ship?
There were certainly a lot of common lessons to draw, and I would say some of the unique strengths that I think that military folks, military veterans bring to the civilian workforce is a real understanding of camaraderie and teamwork, right? We've all heard the phrase "band of brothers," and a lot of civilians will use that, but ultimately, coming from the military, we know what that means. I think we need to be prepared, culturally, for how it can be different in the civilian workforce. At the end of the day, there are some folks who punch the clock and go home, and they leave the mission at the door with the time card. Right? There are other folks who are more what we're used to. But
the what do they call them, the Joe lunchboxes,
right?
And to be honest with you, I'm jealous of those people. I wish that I was built that way, that I could just leave it, when I walk out the door.
Yeah, you bet.
Another thing I've noticed, and maybe you can expound on this if it makes any sense, is when corporations are looking for leaders, they always ask in an interview, tell me a time that you were able to drive change and results. Right. It's a singular ask, but in the response from a military person, it's usually plural. What we did was, right? Did you find yourself doing the same thing? And do you see that when you interview military professionals?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, regardless of what side of the table, if you're interviewing somebody in the military, sometimes the answer is, I don't know if I can tell you that story, right? Based on classification, based on classification and the like, so that's one of the challenges. The other challenge is, with maybe a veteran candidate talking to a civilian interviewer, you may not even speak the same vocabulary.
Right.
So what I would say is, some advice I would offer to somebody coming out as a veteran, and interviewing with a civilian is, you have to do your homework. You have to spend the time and sit down and understand and learn the right vocabulary. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, you might say MOS, or you might say, rate. Hey, what's your rate? That doesn't mean anybody to the civilian across the table. They're going to say job description, right?
Yep.
And similarly, not only just translating, learn the business vocabulary, especially if you're going into a specialist field. But if somebody rattles off, P&L or SME, you're going to get a lot more credit if you know what SME is, a subject matter expert, and P&L is profit and loss. So take the time, do that homework.
That reminds me of when I first started here way back when, 2006. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the first thing I did was call every company in Pittsburgh. I wanted to get veterans back to the burg, and I called steel companies. And what we ended up doing was we found Metallurgy for Dummies.
Yes.
It was a link. I gave it to everybody that interviewed and said, here's the terms, right? Here's talk the talk, walk the walk. So that's a really, really good point, because those that took the time even to learn 5 or 7 or 10 key words,
Right.
we're able to drop those in an interview. I mean, the interviewer said, well, this person's come out of the military, yet they still have already started to talk the talk. So that's really good.
If I could too, there's another piece of
Sure.
advice I'd offer, veterans coming out as they transition to civilian forces. When you're thinking about where you want to go and what you're passionate about, think ahead. Try to have a horizon of maybe 5 years or so. And the reason I say that is what we're used to coming out of the military is your career path is pretty rigid, right? We have detailers, we have career paths. So hey, I'm going to be a junior officer at year 4. I'm going to be a department head at year 7, what have you. It is not like that in the civilian world. And I know a lot of folks know that, but it goes without saying. So what does that mean? Unless you're lucky enough to have, some sort of experienced and knowledgeable mentor, you may be the only person advocating for your career path. So you need to be thinking ahead, both for your current role and what you're going to find fulfilling 2, 5, and 10 years from now.
All right. So you jumped ahead a little bit. You cheated, because my next question was going to be about that a little bit. So again, doing this as long as I have, we know, and the LinkedIn opportunity, veteran opportunity report that came out last year, if anybody watching hasn't seen it, highly recommend reviewing it. But one of the things it talks about is so many military professionals after their first year will look to a second job.
Right.
Almost jumping out of the military into something, realizing, hey, that's not for me, and then going to the right role. But also I find, going to what you talked about, if you're an officer that's used to every 16 to 24 months being challenged with a new challenge,
right?
Corporate America doesn't move at that speed, and you still have that. What would you say to that veteran? And I'm going to say that the JMO or that person that's on that second or third, or in their second job, thinking about going to their third within 5 years. Do you have any perspective or any feedback to give those people?
Yeah, I do, Justin. I would say for veterans in particular and people in general, when that happens, I think it's often just the contrast between expectations and reality. You highlighted the fact that in the military you might change roles every 2 years, and there's just no time to get bored. And really the military is a young person's business. I know on the submarine, on the boat, we refer to the old man, the commanding officer, who in reality is 45, right? And he had all the authority and responsibility of a CEO or greater, right? The civilian world's just not like that, right? So ultimately, that pace is not likely the pace you're going to find, depending on what sector you go into. So understanding that doing your time on the pond, as we said in the Navy, or punching the ticket, that might be 3 years, that might be 5 years, depending on the industry or the role. It could be longer than that. So you need to understand that, to have realistic expectations. The other thing I found is is again kind of a culture shock, right? It's a little bit of a surprise for a lot of folks that I've brought out of the military. In my own experience, is that again, civilian corporate culture is different. So when you see something that's a frustrator, right? You see something that's aggravating, if it's your first job coming out of the military, you might think it's unique about that organization or about that company. But what you may find is that it's actually something that's endemic in the entire corporate world. So it's not a grass is always greener situation. It might be an endemic problem. And I would probably just guess and say that, maybe 80% of those frustrations are common to all civilian companies, and maybe 20% are unique to the place you happen to be today.
Yeah, and well said. And another thing I've noticed too is that in the military, you are given a very structured and fast-paced training.
Yes.
Right. Hey, boom, you're going to be an SME fast, and we're just going to get it into you as fast as possible. Where so much in corporate America, it's through assimilation, it's through OJT, it's through learning. So that just is slower. It's just slower to get to that depth of experience. So good. Yeah, I thank you for saying that, because I was interested to hear your perspective, because I do hear that often especially when you're coming out and you have such a tight knit community as the submarine community, and it's just a few people, a few dozen people, right, that you're all very close with, everything about everybody, and then going to a team of 250, 300 people. And So
I
that's
think
good.
Justin, you talk about the that learning curve and the subject matter expert. I contrast a couple of examples. So when I was in the submarine, our seasoned, experienced officer of the deck was a junior officer who'd been doing it for more than a year, right? And he was seen as the senior, most knowledgeable guy amongst the junior officers. And I contrast that to an organization I was in where there was a engineer who wasn't trusted because he had only been an engineer for 10 years.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, so that that goes right into the next segment, because going from a talent surplus economy, which was 6-7 years ago, to really having a tight edge in February 2020 to the pandemic, it's a talent deficit big time. And right now, I'm going to go on my little soapbox for a second. Job descriptions, you've heard this about a dozen times.
Yep.
Job descriptions were created during the Great Depression. It was 25% unemployment rate. Corporate America said, hey, how can we stop people from applying? We want to build walls, moats, gates. We don't want anybody coming in unless they're the perfect fit. And here we are at 4.6% unemployment. We have 4 million more openings than we have candidates, job seekers, and we're still in that model. Right. So you, as somebody that was trained to develop talent in the military, how do you bring that to corporate America, either through your HR recruiting team, talent acquisition, and then also through as a organizational level leader from your frontline supervisors? Have you found a way to kind of get that going?
Yeah, I love your perspective, Justin, because we have to remember that job descriptions, they're a tool. They should help us. They shouldn't hurt us. Yep. And one of the challenges for hiring managers in general is they're focusing on that experience. They're focusing on the resume and how it matches the job description. And as you know too well, but some of the listeners may not know, there are computer algorithms that compare keywords and of the resume versus the job description to maximize the overlap. And that's how they filter. And in reality, as a hiring manager, I've had the most success, not when I focus on the job description, but when I focus on the character and tenacity of the candidate, right? And that's something you can't put on a piece of paper. Are you tenacious? Yes, no. Do you have grit? Yes, no. Well, of course, they're going to say yes. But
are you professionally curious?
Yeah, correct.
So
that's one of the primary reasons that I'm enthusiastic about hiring veterans is a lot of those character strengths come in, they just come in spades in military veterans, right? You have, you have that grit, you have that tenacity, you have that initiative, because if they didn't, they simply wouldn't have made it through the military. And that's a competitive advantage of those candidates against some of their civilian counterparts for the same job.
As far as that goes, and working on, corporate America calls soft skills, I call it human skills, right? Bringing the human to the forefront of the interview. I think that's really hard, because right now in this economy, you're overpaying for experience.
Yep.
Anybody's experience with inflation, wages rose 4.3% last month, just insane. So you're overpaying for experience, and any experience that another company is going to let go most likely has human capital issues, right? Human performance issues.
Right.
So how do you build find that cornerstone experience that you can say, yep, that's the building block I need if I have the right human? And is that done through changing the requirements in a job description? Is it done through education of your HR team, your ops? I mean, how do you, as a manager that needs to fill so many roles right now? Here's a plug. Chris has a lot of job openings, people. If you want to work for Mitsubishi, track them down on LinkedIn. But how do you get that right talent in this experience-focused market, process?
Yeah, being totally transparent, I wouldn't say I've done a great job at it, but where I've had success is, first of all, to recognize, you have to be a liaison if you're the hiring manager with your human resources department, right? And big companies might have recruiting departments and this and that. Smaller companies, it may just be the hiring manager, but you really have to be proactive. Again, going back to the vocabulary question, I've been able to translate, right? So when I'm hiring what the civilian manufacturing sector might call a machinist, I'm able to explain to the recruiter or the human resource manager, well, hey, there's a job called a machinist mate, but the closer match is a machinery repairman. A machinist mate is more like a precision assembler. And again, if there's if there's not a veteran inside the civilian company to do that, again, shameless plug, that's where RecruitMilitary can help you.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say, and I think this is this isn't a military angle, this is just in general. The job descriptions, they're tools, right? So
Yeah.
there can be a preferred or a nice to have section and then a requirement section. Make the requirement section smaller and make the nice to have bigger, right? So if you say this person must have a bachelor's and 10 years of experience, you're going to throw out a lot of good candidates. And ultimately, the tighter the filter on that experience, the fewer personalities you're going to see, and the fewer opportunities you're going to have to meet someone who's got the character and can handle the learning curve to pick up the skills.
That's true. And it's interesting when I speak to leaders in manufacturing, especially like maintenance managers, production managers, when I say, hey, tell me about your best maintenance tech, best production technician, rarely ever do they talk about their troubleshooting.
Right.
It's almost all on the human's performance side. And then I pick up that job description and go, okay, where do we find that, right? Another thing I've seen that works with job descriptions is the story format. Is telling the obstacles you're going to have to overcome in the role.
Yes.
And the rewards that come with that, because a high performer wants to be challenged.
Yeah.
But we all want to be rewarded, right?
Yep. And something my wife taught me is humans react well to a story. You need to be able to tell a story. And importantly, you need to be able to tell your own story.
Yeah. So I read a book by Jeb Blount, Virtual Selling, last year. And one of the stats in that book was 77% of all information we intake is video. So we are just better at inputting information via video. Hence the reason we're on camera right now. And hence the reason anytime I take a requisition, I usually create a video. It just is more easily digestible. What about when you're speaking to frontline leaders that are civilians? Have you found a way to kind of decode that? Is that just like on the military side? It's exposure? You have to be exposed to this community first?
I think exposure is a big part of it. Again, they need to understand what they're looking for. And going back to the character argument, right? At the end of the day, you've been honest, Justin, I'll be honest. If somebody's willing to show up to work on time and have a positive attitude and be willing to learn, they're already at the top of the heap in this job market. Right.
Yeah.
And so you can get them through the skill set. Not to say skills aren't completely important. There has to be enough skills and experience where the person can add value on day one and give themselves the runway, to learn the rest of the business. But my mantra is, when I was at FlowServe, I can teach somebody pumps, but I can't teach them to show up to work on time. Or similarly, here at Mitsubishi, I can teach or learn gas turbines, but if somebody doesn't have integrity, that's not going to work.
So I had a question here from somebody that's transitioning out from 20 years in the military. As a hiring manager that's looked at those senior enlisted, senior officers, do you feel like it's worth that 4-page resume? Or do you feel like that is overkill and hey, we just need the what have you been doing lately? And then talking points of what you did in the past, kind of that 5-10 years and then previous.
Yep. Yeah. And how long is the right length of a resume is one of those tough questions. I don't know if there's a right answer, but I'll say as the hiring manager, what's right for me is I don't believe necessarily somebody with 20 or 30 years of experience needs to boil it down to 1 page. 2 pages, 2 pages, I think you can get there. 7 pages, I start to wonder how concise the person can communicate. But I have hired folks who have spent 20 or 30 years out of the military who've been able to summarize, their relevant experience in 2 or 3 pages and get to the interview process. And that's where they wow. Getting through to the interview process is key.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that, if you're a hiring authority right now watching, the best way to start a veteran recruiting program is by picking up the phone.
Yep.
If you have a resume from a transitioning military, call, talk to them. We used to run hiring events across the country every month. And on Sundays, I would come in and do presentations for the companies to the candidates when they were going to interview. And one of my favorite jokes is we had a food manufacturer, a cheese manufacturer. They would come in every month. And so on Sundays, I'd have 30 veterans, and I'd walk in and say, real quick, by show of hands, who here wants to make cheese for a living? And everybody would laugh, right?
Yep.
And I would say, yeah, but you all laugh, but 3 or 4 of you will be working for this company within 2 to 3 months. And it always happened. And it was because of the conversation, and that's it. We are looking for connection, just like corporate America is looking to connect with us. That only happens in a conversation because, like you said, the SEO search doesn't work.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work for us. Even if we go do that, can you hear me now?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, good. Sean, can you hear me? Sorry, everybody. I'm just making sure they may have disconnected us at 30 minutes on the dot. Let's see. So, sorry, everybody. I'm waiting for my producer to respond back. Now, okay, good. We're back. So as far as that goes, that's great. There was another question. I don't know if I know this up and out mentality in the private sector. Do you know what that means? Is there an up and out mentality?
I'm not sure what that means, but is that, I'm wondering if that's the question about, how do managers treat their reports, their individual contributors, versus how does that person feel about their career path?
Okay.
In terms of the culture in corporate America, is there are there managers and supervisors who will abuse the workers? And what we used to call in the Navy, we called it the lemon method of management. You take a lemon and you squeeze all the juice out of that lemon,
Yep.
and when you're done, you throw it away and get another lemon, right?
Yeah.
Are there people like that in the civilian world? Of course there are. Are there
Yep.
people who absolutely passionately care about people and will offer to mentor or help you and understand that people is the mission? Absolutely, they're there too, and I recommend you partner with those folks. Maybe get a mentor. So I hope that answers the question.
It does, and it brings up a new thing too. Is that what I've never seen this in my 15 years until the pandemic hit. Really started this year. I'm seeing more and more transitioning military end interviews because of that authoritative leader.
Right.
That on the interview, that leader is saying, I demand this, I expect this. There's nothing about the human at all, nothing about the candidate. It's just demand. And they said, listen, I've been there, done that. Not going to do it. Yep. And they're actually ending the interviews. And so with that said, on the inverse is to HR, talent acquisition, recruiting, if you don't have a military background and you're interviewing veterans, it is really good to get that leader on the call with that veteran as soon as possible. Because that's operations to operations. Hey, are you going to have my best interest in mind? Are you going to help me mentor and grow? Because if so, I'm behind you and I'm going to follow you up the hill. Yep. And that's huge right now.
Yep.
That's great. I know we've went over just a few minutes, but one other thing, I read a New York Times article yesterday, and the article is titled 37-year-olds are afraid of their 23-year-old coworkers. The generation is handing off to the younger generation through COVID of the new employment style. So as a manager that is hiring, are you finding the younger generation is becoming more vocal in demands and what they're looking for?
Yeah. Well, and I got to be careful here because it's difficult to talk about, Generation X, Generation Y, millennials, and that sort of thing, because there's exceptions to every rule. But I think a lot of us have kind of, they've heard the stereotypes that the boomer generation, just wanted to punch the clock and get out, and they were happy for anything they could get. And then the Gen X, was a little bit more ambitious and wanted a career that was fulfilling. And then the next generation, I don't know, is that Gen Y, millennial?
Yeah.
They wanted to be CEO in 15 minutes, right? And then the next generation wanted work-life balance. They want to work 3 hours, from inside Starbucks.
Well, I'm seeing it task versus time.
Yeah.
Where for our generation, if I can group us together, was butts and seats, right?
Yep.
Time on target.
Yep.
And now during the great reshuffle, I'm seeing it's about task management, where they're saying, hey, so what do I have to accomplish every day? Okay, as long as I accomplish that, that's fine, right? You don't need to see me walk past your office every 15, 20 minutes.
Right.
So I don't know. It's very interesting as we go through this reshuffle. When the job seeker has the high ground, how the corporations are kind of pivoting to attract that type of talent. So, well, I know we went a few minutes over, Chris, but I just wanted to say thanks again for volunteering your time to talk to us. I know it's been very interesting for me. I hope the audience is as well. Any last minute sign offs before we close this episode of Vetonomics?
Well, Justin, I just want to say, thank you for having me, and again, appreciate all you do to help folks as their transition and the entire RecruitMilitary team. It's just a great organization, and I'm appreciative of all the service of all the veterans who are coming out and going into the civilian force.
No, yeah, thank you for your time. And again, everybody, Chris Robinson, General Manager over at Mitsubishi Power in Orlando. He's hiring. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.